It's one of those stories that never really ends. A ghost story without a ghost. A mystery that just hangs in the air for decades. We're talking about Amelia Earhart. The name itself brings up a picture. A woman in a leather jacket smiling, standing in front of an airplane. It was a symbol of adventure, of breaking rules. And then she was gone. The story of her disappearance is the one everyone knows, or thinks they know, but the details get fuzzy. The more you look into it, the less clear it becomes. It's not a simple story of a plane that ran out of gas. It's a puzzle with pieces scattered across the Pacific Ocean, hidden in old government files, and buried in the memories of people who heard strange things on their radios one summer in 1937. So, what really happened? The truth is, nobody knows for sure, but there are theories, strong ones, and they all start in the same place. Over a vast, empty stretch of water, with a tiny island that was impossible to find. Let's set the scene. It's 1937. Amelia Earhart is the most famous woman in the world. She's already done incredible things. She was the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. She was a genuine hero, a rock star of her time. She wanted one last great adventure. To be the first woman to fly around the world. Not just around, but around the equator, the long way. A flight of 29,000 miles. Her plane was the best money could buy, a Lockheed Electra 10E. A beautiful twin-engine, all-metal machine. She called it her flying laboratory. It was fitted with extra fuel tanks for the long hauls over the ocean. She wasn't alone. She had a navigator, Fred Noonan, and Noonan was one of the best. He was an expert in ocean navigation, a guy who had spent years charting routes for Pan American Airways' new Trans-Pacific Clipper service. If anyone could find a tiny speck of land in the middle of nowhere, it was him. The trip started in May. They flew east from Oakland, California, across the US, down to South America, across the Atlantic to Africa, then over to India, Southeast Asia, and Australia. They made it. They flew over 22,000 miles. They were tired, but they were close. The hardest part was behind them, or so they thought. The final, most dangerous leg was ahead. From Lae, New Guinea to Howland Island, this was the big one. An 18-hour flight over 2,556 miles of open ocean. Think about that. No landmarks, no roads, just blue water and sky. And their target, Howland Island. A sliver of land, 2 miles long, half a mile wide, a flat, barren piece of coral and sand. It was so small, a pilot could be just a few miles off course and miss it completely. The U.S. government knew this. They were invested in her success. They had a Coast Guard cutter, the Itasca, waiting for her at Howland. The Itasca's job was to act as a radio beacon. It would send out signals for Earhart to home in on. They also sent up smoke signals from the island to make it more visible. Everything was planned. On paper, it was a difficult but achievable flight. On July 2nd, 1937, Earhart and Noonan took off from Lae. The plane was heavy with fuel. It barely cleared the trees at the end of the runway. They flew into the night. For hours, things seemed fine. They sent routine radio messages. All is well. But as dawn approached, the problem started. The Itasca was trying to contact her. Earhart was trying to contact them, but something was wrong. The radio communication was a mess. The Itasca could hear her, but she couldn't seem to hear them. They were on different frequencies, using different radio systems that weren't perfectly compatible. It was a technical nightmare unfolding in real time. The men on the Itasca listened, helpless. They could hear her voice getting stronger, which meant she was getting closer. But she was asking for a bearing, for a signal she could follow, and she wasn't getting it. She reported cloudy weather, making it hard for Noonan to use his sextant to get a star sight for their position. They were flying blind, relying on a radio that wasn't working properly. Her voice transmissions became more and more anxious. "We must be on you, but cannot see you," she said. "Gas is running low." Then, one of the most famous lines in aviation history. She reported her position. "We are on the line 157-337. We are running north and south." This is a key piece of the puzzle. That line, 157 to 337, was a line of position. Noonan had likely taken a sun reading as it rose. This doesn't give you a single point, like a GPS. It gives you a line across the map. You know you're somewhere on that line. You just don't know where. The plan was to fly along that line until they hit Howland Island. The line passed right through it, but if their timing was off, if their speed was a little different than calculated, they could be north or south of the island, still on the same line. Her last message indicated they were flying along that line, searching. And then, silence. The Itasca called and called. no reply. The most famous aviator in the world had vanished. This is where the story splits. This is where the facts end and the theories begin. The first theory is the simplest. It's the official one, the one the US government concluded. It's called the crash and sink theory. It's straightforward. They ran out of fuel. They were searching for Howland Island, flying back and forth along that line of position. They couldn't find it. The engine sputtered and died. The Electra, a heavy metal plane, hit the water and sank quickly, without a trace. It makes sense. The ocean there is incredibly deep, over 16,000 feet. Finding a wreck would be like finding a needle in a haystack the size of the continent. The biggest sea search in history at that time, the US Navy sent ships and planes. They scoured 250,000 square miles of ocean. They found nothing. No oil slick, no debris, no life raft, nothing. For supporters of this theory, the lack of evidence is the evidence. It sank, and it sank deep. The plane had empty fuel tanks in the wings, which would have provided some flotation there. But a rough water landing could have easily ripped the wings off, sending the fuselage straight to the bottom. You know, it's a clean, tragic end to the story, but there are problems with it. Big ones. The first is the radio. Why couldn't she hear the Itasca? Some experts believe she might have had a problem with her receiving antenna. She could transmit, but she couldn't receive. A maddening one-way conversation. The bigger problem is what happened after she went silent. In the days and nights that followed her disappearance, radio operators across the Pacific and even in the United States started picking up faint signals, the distress calls. They were weak, often garbled, but dozens of credible listeners, from Navy radio men to amateur hobbyists, reported hearing what they thought was Earhart's voice, or at least signals from her plane's radio. The official search dismissed these signals. They said they were hoaxes or misinterpretations, but were they? Some of the signals were on the frequencies Earhart was known to use. One teenage girl in Texas, Betty Klenk, kept a detailed notebook of the messages she heard. She wrote down fragments like "water's high," partially on land, partially in water, and pleas for help. For years, her story was ignored, but later analysis showed that what she heard was consistent with a castaway scenario. If the plane crashed and sank immediately, where were these post-loss radio signals coming from? A plane at the bottom of the ocean can't send messages. This one fact opens the door to the second and perhaps most compelling theory. This is the Gardner Island hypothesis. Today, the island is called Nikumaroro. It's a small, uninhabited atoll in the nation of Kiribati. It's about 350 miles southeast of Howland Island, and it lies almost directly on that 157 to 337 line of position that Earhart mentioned in her last transmission. The theory goes like this. Earhart and Noonan missed Howland Island. They didn't know if they were north or south of it. So they turned south, flying along that sun line. It was their best bet. After flying for a couple of hours, low on fuel, they would have seen a small island surrounded by a flat coral reef. At Gardner Island, it wasn't a runway, but at low tide, the reef is a hard, flat surface. It's possible they could have made a gear-up landing on that reef. The plane would have been heavily damaged, but they could have survived. They would be alive. Stranded, but alive. This is where the story gets really interesting. The Group TR, the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, has spent decades investigating this theory. Led by a man named Rick Gillespie, they have mounted numerous expeditions to Nikumaroro, and they have found things. The post-loss radio signals make perfect sense in this scenario. The Electra is sitting on the reef. At low tide, the engines are out of the water, where Earhart could start the right engine. The left one was likely damaged to power the radio and send out distress calls. At high tide, the plane would be swamped with seawater, shorting out the electrical system. The pattern of the reported radio calls is strongest at night, when radio waves travel farther fits with this idea. The tide cycle at Nikumaroro also seems to match up with when the signals were heard. Eventually, the surf would have broken the plane apart, washing it off the reef into the deep water offshore. But what about Earhart and Noonan? They would have been castaways on an island with no fresh water, save for what they could collect from rain. There were coconut trees, birds, and fish. They could have survived for a while. The evidence TR has found on the island is tantalizing. It's not a smoking gun, but it's a collection of clues that paints a powerful picture. In 1940, a British colonial officer named Gerald Gallagher was sent to the island as part of a settlement project. He found a human skeleton under a tree on the southeast end of the island. Next to the skeleton was a woman's shoe, a sextant box like the one Noonan would have used, and the remains of a fire. He sent the bones to Fiji for analysis. A doctor there, Dr. D.W. Hoodless, examined the bones. He concluded they belonged to a short, stocky male, probably of European or mixed race descent. He dismissed any connection to Earhart. The bones were then lost. A crucial piece of evidence gone forever. But decades later, in 1998, researchers from TR found Dr. Hoodless's original measurement notes. They gave the notes to modern forensic anthropologists. Using advanced computer analysis, these new experts came to a stunningly different conclusion. The measurements were consistent with a female of Earhart's height and ethnic origin. The original doctor in 1940 was using outdated methods that were more likely to classify a female skeleton as male. Suddenly, the lost bones of Nikumaroro became a central part of the story. It seemed highly likely that a female castaway had died on that island. The expeditions to Nikumaroro have turned up other things. They found pieces of an American-made woman's shoe from the 1930s, consistent with the kind Earhart wore. They found a zipper from a flight jacket. They found a small glass jar that was identified as a brand of anti-freckle cream popular in the 1930s. Amelia Earhart was known to dislike her freckles and use such a cream. DNA tests on the jar were inconclusive, but it's another piece that fits. Perhaps the most debated piece of evidence is a small piece of aluminum. It's a piece of aircraft skin. Tire researchers argue that it is a custom-made patch that was installed on Earhart's Electra in Miami during an earlier repair. The rivet patterns, the shape, everything seems to match a photograph of the plane taken before its final flight. Other experts disagree, saying it could be from any number of planes from that era. The debate rages on. Then there's the Bevington photo, a photograph taken by a British officer in the months after Earhart disappeared. It shows the shoreline of Nikumaroro. For years, no one noticed anything unusual. But when digitally enhanced, an object sticking out of the water off the reef looks uncannily like the landing gear of a Lockheed Electra. Is it a trick of light and shadow, or is it the wreckage of her plane before it was swept away for good? So you have a plausible location right on her flight path. You have post-loss radio signals that make sense only if the plane was on land. You have a skeleton of a probable female castaway. You have artifacts from the 1930s that are consistent with what she would have had. It's a powerful circumstantial case. It suggests a long, slow, tragic end for Earhart and Noonan. Not a quick crash, but weeks or months of struggle on a deserted island before finally succumbing to thirst or injury. It's a much more harrowing story. But there's a third theory. This one is darker, more cinematic. It's the Japanese capture theory. This theory has many variations, but the basic idea is this: Earhart and Noonan were not just off course. They were way off course, or perhaps they were on a secret mission for the US government. The theory claims they flew into the Marshall Islands, which were then controlled by Japan, while Japan was building up its military in the Pacific, fortifying islands in violation of international treaties. The U.S. wanted to know what they were doing, so the story goes, President Franklin D. Roosevelt asked Earhart, under the cover of her round-the-world flight, to fly over some of these Japanese-held islands, like Truk or Saipan, and take pictures. Her plane was not a spy plane, but it was fast and had a long range. Something went wrong. Either they got lost, had engine trouble, or were shot down, and they crash-landed in the Marshall Islands. They were picked up by the Japanese, taken as spies, and eventually died in custody on the island of Saipan. This theory has been around for a long time. It feeds into a narrative of government conspiracy and cover-ups. Over the years, people have come forward claiming to be witnesses. Marshall Islanders who said they saw a plane crash and two white people, a man and a woman, being taken away by soldiers. U.S. Marines who served on Saipan after it was captured in World War II claimed to have heard stories from locals about two American flyers who were executed. Some even claim to have seen the graves. A book called Amelia Earhart, The Final Story, pushed this theory hard. It relied on interviews with a woman who claimed her father, a Japanese officer, told her he was involved in Earhart's capture. There have been searches for the plane in the jungles of Saipan and for their supposed graves. A photo surfaced that some claimed showed Earhart and Noonan in Japanese custody. But the Japanese capture theory is full of holes. The US government has repeatedly denied any spying mission, and it doesn't make much sense. Sending the most famous woman in the world on a secret spy mission in a civilian plane is a terrible idea. If she were caught, it would be a massive international incident. There are far more discreet ways to gather intelligence. The witness accounts are also highly unreliable. Many of them came out decades after the event. Stories change over time, memories are faulty, some of the accounts have been proven to be false. The photograph that supposedly showed Earhart and Noonan was later debunked. It was from a Japanese travel book published years before her flight, and there's no official record, no Japanese or American document has ever been found that even hints at their capture. For two people as famous as Earhart and Noonan to be held prisoner and executed without leaving a single trace in the meticulous records of either the Japanese or American military seems highly improbable. The theory makes for a great movie plot, but it lacks the kind of physical, verifiable evidence that supports the Nikumaroro hypothesis. There are other, even wilder theories, that she survived and lived out her life under a new identity as a New Jersey housewife named Irene Bolam. This was thoroughly disproven, that they turned back and crashed on an island near New Guinea, that they were abducted by aliens. When a mystery is this big, it attracts all kinds of speculation. So where does that leave us? We have three main possibilities: crash and sink, the simplest and most official story, or Gardner Island, the most evidence-rich and scientifically investigated theory. In Japanese capture, the most dramatic and conspiratorial one, most serious researchers today lean towards the Gardner Island Nikumaroro hypothesis. It just seems to answer more of the questions. It explains the post-loss radio signals. It explains the artifacts found on the island. It explains the skeleton. It fits the known facts of her last transmission. It doesn't require a secret government plot. It only requires a simple, fatal navigational error. But it's not proven. Until someone finds a piece of the Electra with a serial number on it lying in the deep water off Nikumaroro, it will remain a theory. And finding that wreckage is an almost impossible task. The underwater terrain is a sheer volcanic slope, full of cliffs and crevices. TR and others, like deep sea explorer Robert Ballard, have searched with submersibles and sonar. They found nothing definitive. Maybe that's why the story endures. We don't have an ending. Amelia Earhart didn't just die, she vanished. She flew off the edge of the map and into legend. Her disappearance leaves a blank space, and we can't help but try to fill it in. The story is about more than just a lost plane. It's about the limits of human endeavor. She was pushing the boundaries of technology and courage. In 1937, flying the Pacific was like going to the moon. You were on your own. There was no GPS, no satellite phones, no global rescue network. There was just you, your machine, your navigator, and the stars. And if something went wrong, the world was a very big and very empty place. The search for answers continues. New technologies might one day scan the ocean floor off Nikumaroro and find the definitive proof. Or a forgotten document might turn up in an archive. But for now, the story of Amelia Earhart's last flight remains open. It's a reminder that even in our modern world, where everything seems to be mapped and known, some mysteries remain. And Amelia Earhart, the woman who spent her life exploring the unknown, became the greatest unknown of all. She is forever flying toward that tiny island, forever just out of sight, her voice forever crackling over a radio, lost in the static of time.